Next speaker we've got for the executive track is JD Sherman. He's our Chief Operating Officer here at HubSpot. So prior to this, actually had a career in finance, so working on the numbers, with VP of Finance at IBM, and then moved on to be the Chief Financial Officer at Akamai. JD's a really great guy who brings a really interesting mix of humor and learning and teaching to the management team. I've really appreciated having him as part of the discussions. Keeps things light, so it should be both educational and entertaining. I'll turn it over to JD now.
Thanks, everybody. Started a couple slides ahead, which is always an interesting way to do a presentation. Let's see if I can get this working here. Okay, so here we are at Inbound, and at Inbound we talk about how the world has changed and the way people live, work, and shop and buy has changed, and how companies need to change the way that they market and sell to match the way the modern human lives and works and shops and buys. And I don't think that, well, let me ask first of all, how many of you guys in the room are marketing professionals? Okay, that's like almost everybody. You probably don't need another talk on why that's the case. I think we sort of all have that. What I want to talk about today is how that same change is impacting the finance world, the CFO, and how we can help the CFO sort of make that transition. And spoiler alert, it's actually pretty easy. I think it's a pretty easy thing to do. So that's what I want to talk about, and hopefully some tips to help you guys sort of collaborate with your CFO partner in your company to be successful, and also, frankly, to talk them into this strategy and get a bigger budget and just be really successful with inbound marketing. So as Jeremy referenced, I'll start with a confession. I am a recovering CFO. I've spent 6 years as a CFO of a public company, and before that, 10 or 15 years as a finance professional, and pretty much the whole way I spent my career fighting with marketing over budgets. That's pretty much fighting the budget battle every year. In fact, when Brian was recruiting me for this job as Chief Operating Officer of HubSpot, he asked me, what do you know about marketing? I said, marketing, I love marketing because when times get tight, it's a really, really easy budget to cut. Now, surprisingly, he hired me anyway. I don't know if that was smart or just a gutsy move on his point, but there's a reason why I thought about it that way and why a lot of CFOs think about it that way, and this is the reason right here. I'll tell you a little story. I was about a month into my new job as a CFO, first time CFO ever. Nervous in the job, still a little naive, and the CMO of our company comes into my office and he says, I have a great idea, but I need your help because I don't have budget for it. I'm like, okay, what's the idea? He said, we're going to put our company's name up on the Green Monster at Fenway Park. It's going to be up there. You've seen the Sports Authority sign, you've seen the Volvo sign. It's going to say Akamai Technology. It's going to be awesome. I'm like, oh, okay, how much is this going to cost? Like, why do you need budget? Because you have a marketing budget. He said, yeah, but I can't cover this in my budget because it's going to be $1.5 million. And I have to make a 3-year commitment, so I need $4.5 million. And I'm like, okay. Now, I didn't want to be the just no-sayer all the time, so I asked a very simple question. I said, why? Like, what are we going to get for it? What's going to be, like, how are we going to know that that sign is working? And what he said to me is the reason why I felt the way when I talked to Brian. He said, dude, it's marketing. What do you mean, why? You just do it. It's marketing. And so that's really not the way to sort of communicate your marketing strategy to the CFO. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the way you can communicate your marketing strategy to the CFO, and really how that actually gets easier in this new world with inbound marketing. So I don't know if you guys seen the agenda slide right, because it's not coming up right on here. That's okay. Okay, so here's my agenda today. What I want to do is I want to start by talking about the CFO persona, right? I consider myself a marketer now for some reason, so let's talk about personas. It's always good to develop a persona if that's who we're going to try to sell to. Then we'll talk about putting our world, inbound marketing, into CFO-SPEAK. And I think one of the things that we'll find is those two worlds are really coming together very nicely. Marketing is becoming more like finance, actually. And then lastly, we've learned a bunch of stuff, a bunch of tips and tricks, I guess you could call it, at HubSpot that makes sure that our finance team and our marketing and sales team work really well together, and I'll share some of those tips from you. Does that sound all right? Okay, let's go. Let's talk about the CFO persona. Now, obviously, not every CFO is exactly the same type of a person. And also, every CFO role is going to be a little bit different, because when if you're in a very small company, frankly, the CFO's job is probably more like a jack-of-all-trades job. I just got to keep the wheels on the bus. I got to make sure that everything's getting done. I probably am in charge of everything soup to nuts. If you get to the larger companies, then the CFO job becomes a little bit more like a strategic finance professional. You start to worry about risk return, things like that. So there is definitely a variation there, but I would say that there's sort of a hierarchy of needs that every CFO has. Now, everybody knows this hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Familiar with this? As the idea that human beings have very basic needs, and once they meet those needs, they can sort of move up the pyramid, move up the hierarchy. So I think there's sort of a hierarchy of needs with CFOs as well. And the way I see it is sort of this. That sort of physiological need is solvency. At the end of the day, the CFO has to make sure, can I make payroll? Can we pay the rent? All that kind of stuff. That's the number one thing. If that's a problem, almost everything else falls by the wayside, including marketing, obviously. On top of that, safety and security for a CFO is risk management, because a CFO, she has to worry about the downside. She has to protect from the downside. That's her job, and that's why a CFO can tend to be a more conservative type. And frankly, you want a more conservative type as a CFO. That's why our CFO, John Kinzer, is probably a better CFO than I ever was, because I think he's got that sort of philosophy. Once you have that sort of, you've managed risk and everything, then you want to start being able to make investments, but it's really important to have predictability. A CFO's job is really, really difficult if you're doing things where the results are not at least a little bit predictable. And again, it goes back to the sort of risk aversion and the more conservative approach. If you get to a predictable model where you have your risk mitigated and you can go from there, then growth really starts to matter. And I can tell you, growth solves a lot of problems. For a company that's growing, things happen. Things happen in a much more fluid way, and you can make some really bold bets. So growth becomes really important. And then you have self-actualization, which every CFO dreams of, which is imagine a sustainably growing company with a predictable model where you're very solvent and the risks are managed. I mean, I just went to my happy place. That's exactly what everybody wants. Every CFO wants that. So I think that's the sort of way we should think about the CFO persona when we're talking about our marketing strategy. And we need to sort of check off, are we meeting all those needs? Are we helping the CFO move up that hierarchy? Okay, so let's talk about doing just that. Let's talk about inbound marketing in a way that I think really will resonate with CFOs, with your CFO. So again, remember where we're coming from. From a lot of CFOs, like myself when I was in the role, marketing is a big black hole. Money goes in, information goes in, nothing ever comes out. So you have to always remember where you're starting, right? That is the starting point, unfortunately. But there's really good news, and that's the world is changing for marketing. In the old world of marketing, what we thought of as our CFOs thought of as it's advertising expense. Marketing is a black hole. I put money in, and I look down there, and nothing comes out. It's just advertise. I spend it, it's gone. Is it working? I don't know. It's pretty much gone. In the new world, though, it's about building assets, content assets. Assets is a word that will resonate with your CFO. We know about building assets. It's creating value. It's the way we measure value from an accounting standpoint. In the old world, you had unmeasurable, if that's a word, unpredictable results. So it was more art. In the new world, there's science. There's data. Just like in finance, there's really tight attribution that you can get for your marketing investments. There's predictability. Over time, when I start to build these content assets, what's going to happen. That's really, really awesome. In the old world, it was really hard to have a budget discussion around marketing at all. So what I used to end up doing, and what your CFO probably does, is you step back and say, I got to spend something on marketing. At least I understand that. Let's just pick a percentage of revenue or something, and that'll be what we spend. So, but in the new world, wow, you can use financial tools, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the second one, lifetime value to cost of customer acquisition. going forward. But you can use the financial tools that your CFO is comfortable with to measure your marketing traction, which is really, really great. So here's the way to sort of net that down, the mind blower for your CFO. You thought about outbound marketing as an expense. Inbound marketing, you think about it as creates assets. And it creates assets, it actually creates asset S, as you can tell by the slide. I don't know what happened there. But that's a big change. That is a mind blower for the CFO. Instead of money I put down in the black hole and I wonder if anything ever happened, if I got any traction, now I'm building assets that I can actually see the value of. And I'd like to just show one example of that I think is really cool about creating assets, starting to build a lead generation factory. Here's a blog post that was written by Brian Halligan, my supervisor, 5 years ago. It was about inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. Interesting topic, especially back then. That was still a relatively new topic. Here we are in 2015, 5 years later. It still ranks #1 on Google. It still gets views every month, and it still generates leads every month. That's an asset we built 5 years ago that is still paying returns. And so that's the way we want to get our CFOs thinking about our marketing investments. So you can ask your CFO this. You go, what do you want to do? Do you want to rent or do you want to own? Because if you think about it, when you're in the old world, you're renting somebody else's marketing, you're renting somebody else's audience, and as long as you keep paying the rent, just like your office building, right? As long as you keep paying the rent, you can keep showing up to your office. But when you own the factory, even when you go home, that factory keeps chunking out widgets or leads or whatever have you. So now this is a little bit more of a nuanced question because the CFO will tell you some things they actually want to rent, like that office space. Unless you're in real estate, you probably don't want to you don't want to borrow money and buy an office and have a mortgage and stuff like that you have to do. That's not core. But for your core assets, your factory, you want to own your factory. So what's more core than our marketing investment in our business to drive growth? So I think you want to own your marketing investments, your marketing assets. And let me talk about why. So let's talk about the economics. And I just hit on this briefly, but I just sort of graphed it out because CFOs love charts, right? This is the way it would work for a rental model, right? This is a model where we're doing pay-per-click advertising. Every month, we put dollars in, dollars in, dollars in, and while we have those months in, we get leads out, leads out, leads out, and the cost for those leads stays, all else being equal, like if we live in a vacuum, which is one of my favorite places to live, it stays the same. But more likely, as a lot of marketers know, more competition for the cost, for those clicks and everything, it could actually trend up. But let's just say, for argument's sake, you spend the money, you get the leads, the cost always stays the same until the day you stop spending that money. Think about ownership economics. So here's the red line that shows the leads that we're gathering. And of course, early on when you're building the factory, you're still getting to scale, and the leads come over time, over time, over time as you build your content assets. But what happens with the cost per lead is really, really great. It's something that finance executives call leverage. We like to call leverage. So you can talk to your CFO and say, we're going to build this content asset, we're going to build this lead generation factory, and we're going to get leverage. Our costs are going to go down over time. Really fantastic. So I would say when you own your marketing assets, 3 good things happen. We talked about less expensive over time. The chart's sort of messing up here, obviously, but the second thing is it's less expensive is the first, time is the second. No, just kidding. More predictable and more measurable. So I want to double click on each of those 3 things so we can take a look at that. So we talked about how the model works, right? They get less expensive over time. I just wanted to share with you guys a little bit of data. This is data from our State of Inbound Marketing report. So we have 15,000 customers. We asked them how things are going, and the data quantifiably shows that inbound leads cost very significantly less than outbound leads. This is a very, very powerful slide to show to your CFO. Inbound leads cost 2/3 of what an outbound lead costs from our experience with our customers. Let's talk about predictability. Here's a fun fact. If we sent all of our marketers home on vacation for a month, we would get 92% of the leads that we expect to get in that month from the content they already created. So you can go into your CFO's office and say, I want to run a test. we're all going to go on vacation for a month, and I'll show you that we still get 92% of the leads. Maybe they'll let you do that. That could be a great way to get an extra month's vacation. But that's what I'm talking about predictable and having a lead generation factory that even when you go home, those leads keep coming. And for a CFO, we talked about the value of a predictable model, knowing that that's coming every month, really helps them understand the value of inbound marketing. And then the last one I want to double click on is more measurable. And you know, does everybody know who this is? Does anybody know who this is? No market? This is John Wanamaker. Does anybody know what John Wanamaker said? That's exactly right. This is the way most people think about, or most finance professionals would think about advertising. So you don't need to be this guy when you're doing modern inbound marketing, because you can report on everything. In a digital world, you can track everything right down to the revenue. And as I'll talk about a little later, I would really encourage you to share this data and use this data sort of collaboratively with your finance team. This is a report that just happens to be out of the HubSpot's new reporting tool. So you can see here, just as an example, is the conversion by marketing program that we have there. You don't have to use HubSpot to do your marketing reporting. I don't know why you wouldn't, but you don't have to. But this is a really important way to sell your CFO, or put inbound marketing into CFO-SPEAK so that they understand it. Like, here's a report. It's marketing, just trust me. Here's a report of how things are going. So again, the key is we're building a lead generation factory. We're building an asset. And I want to give you one other example of how that works and how that looks when you're building that asset. So here's a blog post that we wrote on December 31st, 2014, I think is when we wrote it, literally the last day of the year. I'm not sure why our blogger wasn't out like having fun on the town, but anyway, they were writing a blog post. And you can see the first month that we had it out there was January of 2015, and it had a great month. The little blue part of the line there, you can see we pushed it out over our social media channels and promoted it. But what's really interesting is, look at the traffic. It just kept coming every month. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. There's the visits every month. Same thing with the leads. Arguably, even the leads grow. The leads can actually grow. If you sort of hit on a meaningful topic, people keep coming back and back and back to that, and you can build a growing lead machine. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about creating assets. That's the way to talk about it with our CFOs. So you can say this to your CFO, as I've been saying over and over again already. We want to build a lead generation factory. Like, we're done with we're not putting expenses. We're not putting expenses out the door that are gone, and we hope for the best. We're building a lead generation factory. That's the way to talk about it with your CFO. Okay, so let's check in on our CFO hierarchy. So how are we doing? Solvency? Well, we showed that the leads are lower cost. That will help us check the box there. Risk management, we talked about how measurable they are, and the power of measurability in risk management is really, really important, because when something's not working, you stop doing it. When something's really working, you double down on it. That's how you manage risk, measurability. And predictability, we showed how we should all take a 1-month vacation and just to test this out, but the leads keep coming. Once you build that factory, the leads keep coming. So we've sort of got the bottom part. Let's talk about the top part of the hierarchy. Let's talk about growth. CFOs want to grow, just like everybody else. But what do CFOs want even more than that? They really want predictable growth. That's really the magic for a CFO. Let's talk about that a little bit. So most CFOs think about growth in terms of sales. It's like those are the levers you can kind of control. And most CFOs have a model for how they think about setting their growth targets with sales. So let me just work through a very simple example here. Let's say we want to grow our revenue by $1 million next year. So we want to build a model to do that. Here's the way that might work. We'd say, okay, first thing we know is our average customer is going to pay us $10,000. Our product costs $10,000. Our service is $10,000. So good, I know I need 100 customers. Let's say our average, I can look back and I see that my salespeople, it's very measurable, they're selling 10 customers per person, so I need to add 10 salespeople. Pretty straightforward. I can also maybe, if I'm a little more sophisticated, say, I got to give them leads, and I know what my conversion rates are, so I need these leads. And then this is the part where you kind of have to groan a little bit. You say, okay, I got to figure out how to get those leads. So marketing spend, dollars in the top of the funnel, and let's hope that I get for $30 a lead, I can try to budget $300,000, but I don't know for sure. Here's what inbound marketing does to help you sort of change the mindset of that. The first thing that happens, as you guys know as marketers in the room, is inbound leads tend to close at a higher rate. These are customers that are looking for your products or services and are more ready to buy, so you need less of that. But the second thing, which is even more interesting, at least to me, is that the top of the funnel now becomes about visits. It becomes about your factory rather than about the dollars going into the machine. And then what we talked about predictability, if I just use that 90% as a rough estimate, we probably have 90% of the visits to that machine to fuel that growth going forward. So now what a CFO is thinking about is, how do I get that incremental 10% increase? It's a different mindset. The other part of that mindset that you talk to your CFO about is, okay, the inbound marketing budget changes from the old style outbound marketing budget. Instead of spending all this money on programs, which is in the black here on this pie chart, and very little on people, we basically flipped that around. We're building a lead generation factory with content creators, and so we're going to flip that around and invest in people rather than the black money that goes down the black hole. So you can say this to your CFO. The way to think about that is, now, instead of dollars going in the top, when you're building your growth models, think about salespeople are to sales as content creators are to leads. So as you're growing your sales team, and for growth, you want to grow your content creation team too. Now, I could do a whole nother presentation on building models for that. I'd probably be better off letting Kip do that, our CMO. But you can actually build a model to figure out how many content creators I need to hit my leads. So now we can go back and say, how do we do on the rest of the persona, on the rest of the hierarchy, that is. So we showed how inbound marketing scales with investment, and we showed how you're creating assets, sustainable assets. So I think, in general, we've done pretty well with inbound marketing. I think this is a great way to sort of present the case to our counterparts in finance. So let me switch gears a little bit and talk about how we can now work together with finance for growth. We've probably convinced our CFO at this point. There's sort of three things, and they all center around data that I'll talk about, 3 tips. The first one is measure ROI and collaborate with finance on doing it. So this seems quite obvious, but I thought this was an interesting slide, again, from our State of Inbound Marketing. We asked people in this, do you track your ROI or not? And then we also asked, did your marketing budget increase or decrease year over year? What you notice is, for the folks that tracked ROI, 58% of their budgets increased, whereas the ones that didn't, 37% of their budgets increased. Now, that's interesting. What's really interesting to me is actually the 37%. Like, that's a stunning thing. If you're a marketer and you're not tracking your ROI and you go and get an increased budget year over year, that was exactly the problem that our CMO had with me at Akamai. He would come and want an increased budget, and boy, it was just a really difficult discussion for him. So that the importance of tracking ROI in this new world it really can't be understated. So how do you do that? There are a lot of ways to do that. I want to talk about one in particular that we use, and I think you guys can. I think it's actually applicable to a lot of companies. It's called the technique is called LTV to CAC, or lifetime value to cost of acquiring a customer. It was kind of invented for software businesses like HubSpot, where you have to try to estimate the real long-term life of a customer. But it's actually very pertinent to any business, because every business should be thinking about, how do I increase the value of customers once I sign them up, the lifetime value of a customer, and how do I do that really, really efficiently by managing my customer acquisition costs? So let's talk about how you would calculate that. So first, the lifetime value. Basically what the lifetime value is the expected value of what a customer is going to spend with you. So in HubSpot's case, it's like, okay, they're going to spend $10,000 a year with us. We think they'll stick around for 5 or 6 years or something like that. For your business, it might be their first purchase tends to be $100, then I can get them to buy 2 times a year after that. You figure out what that is. And then you, of course, have to multiply that by your gross profit percentage, because it's going to cost you something to deliver that product or service. On the other side, your customer acquisition cost, the way to figure that out is add up all the costs of acquiring those customers in some period, like a month or a quarter, and then divide by the number of customers you acquired. And then you get a good sense of, oh, okay, that's what it's costing me per customer to sign them up. So quick math on that, like for example, let's say you have a customer that's going to pay you $200 a month and you think they'll stick around for roughly 4 years. I rounded to 50 months because my math's not as good as it used to be. Multiply by your gross profit, you get $5,000. That's the value of a customer. The flip side is, let's say we spent $10,000 on sales and marketing. We've signed up 10 customers. That's a $1,000 cost. And when you get those two numbers, you get a very interesting ratio. In this example, 5 to 1. That's your LTV to CAC. What that basically says is, I've built a machine, I've built a factory, and every dollar I put in the front door of that factory, I get $5 out. So everybody should try to calculate this. I would really encourage you to try to calculate this for your business. And once you calculate it, hopefully your number's 5 to 1, which is an awesome ratio. And then you can ask your CFO this. If you have a machine that you can put $1 in and get $5 out, how many dollars do you want to put in that machine? All of them is the right answer. The right answer is all of them. That will help you with the budget discussion very significantly, would be my guess. That's the way we think about it at HubSpot, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this section where we talk about transparency. It's hard to do slides on transparency, so what I thought I would do is I'd actually do an example of how we use this at HubSpot. Now, I've made up the numbers to protect the innocent, but the stories are still true. Now that we're a public company, we can't broadly share our numbers. But we calculate LTV to CAC all sorts of ways to Sunday. We do it by customer type. We do it by geography. We do it by channel to market. And it's really, really interesting. And we have a very good LTV to CAC. I'm proud to say we share it with Wall Street. It's like 5 to 1. And that's interesting. But what's really, and what do you notice on this chart that's really, really interesting? Anything? Well, partners are awesome, right? All our partners in the room, you're awesome. We love working with you. The economics are really, really fantastic for us and for you, hopefully. But this is what's really interesting. We love our very small business customers too, but we looked at it and we're like, that's actually not that great of a ratio there. And so we thought about this. We said, what do we do? One idea would be to try to improve the lifetime value of these customers. Like, can we get them to spend more? Well, that seemed hard because they're small businesses. The pushback we got was, oh, your services cost too much. We don't have the money, et cetera. So the other thing we thought is, well, maybe then the problem is our cost of acquiring them is too high. And we kind of said, yeah, that's probably right. That's probably the case. Our model, our go-to-market model, does not match that customer set. And the reason I'm talking about this in the transparency section is that led us to lead in. That led us to make the decision of, we want inbound everywhere. Our mission is help millions of companies grow with inbound marketing and sales. We need to attack it a different way for the very small business. So lead in is a different type of a model to match that. And so our transparency and use of these ROI numbers, or these LTV to CACs, led us down that path. And then the last thing I would say is agree on goals up front with your CFO, and set service level agreements, or SLAs, between marketing and sales, between marketing and finance, et cetera. And when you agree on those goals together, you're in the boat together. That always works out well. And of course, you can track those daily, weekly, monthly. Again, here's another example from our new reporting tool where you would track the leads, et cetera. And if you're looking at this together every time, publish it out daily, everybody's looking at the same data, then you're really all sort of working together. Okay, great. So let me wrap up a little bit. By this point, usually the CFO gets it. They jump on board. It's pretty exciting because what we've basically described for the CFO is money falling out of the sky. So that's not a hard concept to get. It's like, let's get a bigger bucket in a lot of cases. But not every CFO is like that. As I talked about at the start, some CFOs are a little bit more set in their ways than others. So there's another quote I like to use in those types of situations. It comes from our friend Guy Kawasaki, who talked here last year and a couple of years before that. He says, if you have more money than brains, use outbound marketing. If you got more brains than money, focus on inbound marketing. So what you can do is you can ask your CFO, do you have more money than brains? And if the answer is yes, then I guess you're out of luck. But most of the time, they'll cop to the fact that they probably have more brains than money. So that's sort of my talk. If you found it useful, and helpful, and will help you get sort of across the goal line with how you work with your finance teams and your companies. We've made this deck available. We also have a Convince Your CFO kit, and you can find it at this spot on the website. I didn't think of that. And I'm also happy to answer any questions for any of you guys that have questions. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead. I think you're supposed to go to one of the microphones. Is that okay? You can just come up to this microphone.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how about in the first, I don't know, second or third year of the company when inbound still doesn't show value and you know that it will, but it takes time, and also you have the CEO or CFO pressuring you, okay, 2 months later, where are the leads? And
Yes.
so how about the early days? Well, the first 3 years, I would say.
That is a big challenge, and that's why I think part of thinking about it like you're building a factory, your CFO will get that. You know, let's say we're in the widget business, we have to build a factory. While we're building that factory, the amount of widgets coming out the door, we know we're making an investment over time. We just need to, but we have relative confidence that when we have that factory built, the widgets are going to come out. It's the same thought process for leads, and there are a lot of resources, like for example in this Convince Your CFO deck, that you can say, yes, you built a lot, it's working. There are case studies where this works. That's one point. The second point I say is you can actually measure the progress. Obviously, you're not going to get from day one hit your overall lead generation goal, but you can measure the progress, and the progress does come. We had an interesting investor track yesterday, and one of our partners was at the investor track. She did a great job, and an investor asked her a very similar question, and she said, true, but you know what? You can show in 90 days early progress, and in 120 days you definitely can show progress. So I think focus on that progress, get everybody aligned with the big picture goal that we're building this factory, and I think you can get across the goal line. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Do you want to just yell it out?
I'm curious about the thoughts, assumptions that went into lead in and what you're thinking that's going to do to customers acquisition costs with a very small.
Oh, sure. So lead in, as many of you saw yesterday, if you didn't, you should check that out. Is a product. It's a free product, freemium product, where rather than talk to a salesperson, you go get it and you try it for free. And that should make it much less expensive for us to get users of that product, right? I hope that we get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of users of the lead-in product. And some are going to like it and always use the free version, and that's great. It meets our mission of inbound everywhere. Some of them, hopefully, will upgrade to HubSpot, potentially. Or some of them maybe will have additional paid features on top of that. But what we did was we thought about, we actually have to solve the customer acquisition cost piece of that, and this data helped us figure that out. Yeah. There's a question back there. Go ahead.
Yeah. So across the small and medium business size sector, what do you see across your customer base? What do you see is the average payback period, especially if they are trying to staff up a team of content managers and obviously purchasing HubSpot subscription? The bigger cost to them is the people cost. How long of an investment is that?
I see. Okay, so the question, just for those of you that didn't hear it, was how long is the payback period on making sort of that initial inbound marketing investment? Sounds pretty similar to the question that was just asked here. It can vary, and a lot of the variation depends on, are you starting from scratch or are you starting from an old playbook that you're trying to just build up on, and where your traffic starts. So it's hard for me to give you a great exact answer. I think the answer that we've seen is within 90 to 120 days you start to get a payback from that. I would argue that in 6 to 12 months, if you're doing this right, you have a lead generation factory that's working. Okay? All right, folks, thank you very much.